He had always trusted her, or at least he had convinced himself that he did. Daniel and Claire had been together for 6 years, and he had built his world around her. Her laughter, her scent, the way her fingers brushed against his when they walked side by side. But lately something had changed. It started with little things, a sudden secrecy about her phone, the way she would leave the room to take certain calls, the hushed conversations that ended abruptly when he entered. He told himself it was nothing. He wasn't the jealous type. But doubt once planted grows like ivy, creeping into the mind and wrapping around every thought. Daniel first noticed it on a Tuesday evening. Claire had always been an open book, leaving her phone lying around, answering texts without hesitation. But that night, when her screen lit up, she quickly flipped it face down. He saw her bite her lip, her eyes flickering toward him, as if checking whether he had noticed. His stomach tightened. He felt something he hadn't in years, an unease that gnawed at the edges of his certainty. Who was she texting? And why did she suddenly have something to hide? That night, long after Claire had fallen asleep beside him, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He tried to push the thoughts away, but they came rushing back with relentless force. He turned onto his side, studying her face in the dim glow of the streetlights outside. Her breathing was steady, peaceful, but his mind was anything but. Was he imagining things? Was he overreacting? No, there was something different about her, and he needed to know the truth. The next day, Daniel started paying closer attention. He wasn't proud of it, but the way Claire acted made him feel like an outsider in his own life. He watched how she held her phone close, how she would leave early for work and come home later than usual. When he asked why, she would smile. A smile that once reassured him, but now felt like a mask. "Just busy," she would say. But busy with what? Or with whom? He tried to brush it off, but the doubt had already taken root. He found himself checking her social media, looking for clues, for anything that might explain the shift in her behavior. But Claire was careful, too careful. There were no obvious signs, no messages left open, no suspicious photos. If something was happening, she was hiding it well. And then the idea struck him. Cameras. He had seen advertisements for home security systems, small, discreet devices that could be placed anywhere. If she was doing something behind his back, he would catch her. He felt a pang of guilt at the thought, but he justified it to himself. He wasn't invading her privacy. He was protecting his own heart. The decision was made. That afternoon, Daniel went to an electronics store and bought a set of high-definition security cameras. He chose ones with night vision, motion detection, and cloud storage. If Claire was hiding something, he would have proof. He told himself he wouldn't use them unless he had no other choice. But deep down, he already knew he would. That evening, while Claire was at work, he installed them. One in the living room, another in the hallway, and the most important one, disguised carefully in their bedroom. His hands trembled as he adjusted the angles, making sure they captured every movement. He hated what he was doing, but the alternative, living in doubt, was unbearable. The first night, nothing happened. Claire came home, kissed him as usual, and curled up on the couch beside him, her body warm against his. He tried to ignore the camera's silent gaze from the corner of the room. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe she wasn't hiding anything. Maybe this was all a terrible mistake. But then, the second night came. 11. The second night began like any other. Claire came home late, offering him a brief kiss before disappearing into the bedroom to change. She seemed distant, her responses clipped, her laughter forced. Daniel tried to act normal, but the weight of his suspicions pressed down on him like an anchor. He wanted to confront her, to demand the truth, but without proof, what could he say? When Claire finally went to bed, Daniel waited. He stared at the ceiling, counting the minutes until her breathing became slow and rhythmic. Only when he was sure she was asleep did he slip out of bed, grabbing his phone. His hands were clammy as he opened the security app. The cameras had been recording for hours. If anything had happened, he would see it. He pressed play. The footage flickered to life, showing Claire moving about the apartment, completely normal, until she answered a call. The way she spoke was different, softer, a voice he hadn't heard in years. It was the way she used to talk to him when they first fell in love. Daniel's pulse quickened. "I miss you too," she whispered. His stomach dropped. It was real. He had feared it, but now he had proof. Someone else was in her life. Someone who made her speak in hushed tones and leave the room to answer calls. His vision blurred with anger. He rewound the footage, playing the moment again. Claire leaned against the kitchen counter, her fingers brushing her lips as she listened intently. Then she giggled, an intoxicating, genuine laugh, the kind she hadn't shared with him in months. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He had lost her, and he hadn't even known it. 17. He spent the next day in a daze. Every glance at Claire felt like a knife twisting in his chest. He studied her movements, the way she avoided his eyes, the way she hesitated before kissing him goodbye. He needed to know more. That night, he checked the cameras again. This time, he fast-forwarded through the mundane moments, searching for something, anything, that would tell him who she was talking to. And then at 2:37 a.m., Claire got out of bed. He watched as she tiptoed into the living room, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She wasn't just whispering this time. She was crying. "I can't keep lying to him," she sobbed. Daniel's fingers tightened around his phone. Lying to him about what? His heart pounded as he watched her wipe her tears, take a deep breath, and compose herself before returning to bed, right beside him. The next morning, Daniel decided to push his investigation further. He waited for Claire to leave for work, then unlocked her laptop. He hesitated for a moment, guilt gnawing at him. But she had already betrayed him, hadn't she? He had every right to know the truth. As he scrolled through her emails and messages, his breath caught. There was nothing suspicious, no love letters, no messages from a secret lover. But then he found something unexpected, a hidden folder. With shaking hands, he opened it. Dozens of documents, medical records, bills, things she had never mentioned to him. And then one email stood out, a message to a doctor. Subject, urgent consultation request. Message, I haven't told my husband yet. I don't know how to. Please, I need answers before I break his heart. Daniel's blood ran cold. What was she hiding? 27. Daniel sat frozen, staring at the email in disbelief. His mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. What could be so devastating that Claire would keep it from him? A lump formed in his throat, and his hands trembled as he closed the laptop. There was no way he could confront her about this. Not yet. He needed answers. For the next few days, Daniel's life became consumed by questions. He couldn't look at Claire without feeling a deep, unsettling ache in his chest. Every word she spoke felt like a lie. Every smile a mask she wore to hide the truth. But still, he couldn't bring himself to confront her. His emotions were a whirlwind. Anger, betrayal, fear. What if he was wrong? What if he was just imagining things? Then one evening, he couldn't take it any longer. Claire had gone out for drinks with friends, as she often did now, leaving him alone in the apartment. His mind raced with thoughts of the hidden folder, of the mysterious email. He needed to know more, needed to find out what she had been hiding. That night, Daniel took a bold step. He accessed her phone. At first, it felt like a violation, like he was crossing a line that should never be crossed. But the more he thought about it, the more he justified his actions. She had lied to him. She had hidden something, and now he would find it. He unlocked the phone and scrolled through her messages. Most were mundane, texts from friends, reminders about work, plans for the weekend. But then his heart skipped a beat when he saw a message from an unknown number. "I'm waiting for you tonight. Same time as last week?" The message was dated just a few days ago. His pulse quickened. Who was this person? What had happened last week? He clicked on the conversation, his hands shaking. The texts were filled with flirtatious messages, plans to meet up, promises of secrecy. It was clear now. Claire was having an affair. Daniel's chest tightened as he read their exchanges, the pain of betrayal overwhelming him. But as he scrolled further, something caught his eye, a name he recognized. "I can't believe we're doing this again, Sam. What if Daniel finds out?" His mind raced. Sam. Claire had mentioned a colleague named Sam before, but never in any significant way. She had always spoken about him in passing, as just another person at work. Daniel's heart sank. This wasn't just some random affair. It was someone she knew well, someone she had likely been seeing for a while. The next morning, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled over him. He couldn't look at Claire the same way anymore. Every word she spoke felt like a lie. He watched her more closely, searching for any signs of guilt, any signs of her involvement with Sam. But she was still the same Claire, the woman he had fallen in love with. And yet, everything had changed. That afternoon, Claire left for work as usual, and Daniel's mind began to race. He knew he had to confront her. He had to know the truth. But how? How could he approach her without completely destroying everything they had built together? He thought back to the email he had found on her laptop, the one where she had mentioned needing answers before breaking his heart. What could that possibly mean? Was there something more going on? Later that night, Claire came home, tired and distant as usual. She didn't seem to notice the shift in Daniel's behavior, but he couldn't hide his feelings anymore. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. He waited for her to settle into the couch, flipping through a magazine as if nothing was wrong. His heart pounded in his chest as he gathered the courage to ask her the one question that had been haunting him for days. "Claire," he said, his voice low but steady, "who is Sam?" She froze, the magazine slipping from her hands. The air in the room seemed to thicken, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The seconds stretched into eternity as Daniel waited for her response. Finally, Claire looked up at him, her face pale. "What do you mean?" "I know about the messages," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know about Sam, and I need to know what's going on." For a moment, Claire didn't say anything. She just stared at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fear. Then her gaze softened, and she let out a long, shaky breath. "I never wanted you to find out," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to hurt you." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for her to explain. He needed answers. He needed to understand why she had betrayed him, why she had been lying to him for so long. Claire took a deep breath, then began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been seeing Sam for the past few months," she confessed, "but it's not what you think. It's not an affair." Daniel's mind reeled. Not an affair? What did that mean? Was she trying to make him believe that this wasn't as bad as it seemed? He couldn't understand. "What do you mean, Claire? How is this not an affair?" Daniel asked, his voice strained with disbelief. The room felt like it was closing in on him, the walls pressing down with the weight of her words. Claire looked away, her hands trembling as she clasped them together in her lap. "It's complicated, Daniel. It's not something I'm proud of." "Then explain it to me," Daniel snapped, his frustration boiling over. "You've been lying to me for months. You've been hiding things, keeping secrets. And now you want me to believe it's not an affair?" She flinched at his raised voice, but she didn't back down. "No, it's not about cheating. It's about something I've been struggling with, something I've been trying to understand myself." Daniel took a step forward, his fists clenched by his sides. "Then tell me what it is, Claire. Tell me what's been going on behind my back." She took a shaky breath and finally met his eyes. "Sam is a therapist," she said softly. "He's been helping me with something personal, something I've been hiding from you for a long time." Daniel felt his heart race. A therapist? What could you possibly need therapy for? You've been acting distant, like you're someone else entirely, and now you're telling me it's just therapy? "It's not just that," she whispered. "It's about my past, things I've never told you, things I was too ashamed to share. I didn't know how to tell you without losing you." Daniel's mind spun, the revelation hitting him like a punch to the stomach. What was she talking about? What could be so terrible that she couldn't share it with him? The anger that had been building inside him began to fade, replaced by confusion and a sense of deep unease. "What do you mean your past?" Daniel asked, his voice quieter now, filled with curiosity and dread. Claire took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she tried to steady herself. "I've been hiding something about my childhood, something I thought I could forget, but it's been eating away at me for years, and I didn't know how to handle it." Daniel's mind raced. What kind of secret could be so powerful that it drove her to keep it hidden? Was it something he had done? Something that had happened before they met? He didn't know if he was ready to hear it. "I need to know, Claire," he said softly, his voice cracking with emotion. "Whatever it is, just tell me." She looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper as she began to speak. "When I was younger, I was abused." Daniel froze, the words hitting him like a hammer. His mind couldn't process what she had just said. Abuse? How could he have known? How could he have missed something so important? "I was just a child," Claire continued, her voice trembling. "And for years I tried to bury it. I tried to forget, to pretend it never happened. But the memories have always been there, lurking beneath the surface, making me feel empty." Daniel felt his stomach twist. He didn't know what to say. He had always known there was something deeply painful about Claire's past, but he never imagined it could be something like this. "Why didn't you tell me, Claire?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Why didn't you trust me with this? Why keep it a secret?" Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I was scared, Daniel. I was terrified that if I told you, you would leave me, that you would see me as broken, as damaged." Daniel reached out, taking her hand in his. For the first time in days, he felt a flicker of tenderness for her. "You're not broken, Claire," he said gently. "You're not damaged. I'm here for you. But you need to trust me. You need to let me in." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with pain and uncertainty. "I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how. I thought I could handle it on my own. But Sam, he's been helping me face it, helping me understand what happened, helping me heal." Daniel's mind was reeling. He didn't know how to respond. Part of him wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But another part of him, angry and hurt, felt like the ground beneath him had been ripped away. The woman he thought he knew, the woman he had trusted, was a stranger in so many ways. "And the messages?" Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What about the secret meetings, the whispering on the phone? Why did you hide that from me?" Claire's expression softened. "It's not what you think. Sam is helping me confront the trauma from my past. The phone calls, they were just check-ins, nothing more. I never meant for it to hurt you, but I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't know how to ask for your help." Daniel's mind was still racing, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, but not yet fully connecting. Was it possible? Could she really be telling the truth? Or was there something else at play here? "I don't know what to believe anymore," Daniel muttered, his heart heavy with confusion. Claire took a step closer to him, her voice soft. "Please, Daniel, I know I've hurt you, but I never wanted to keep secrets. I just didn't know how to share this part of me. I didn't know how to let you in." Daniel closed his eyes, the weight of her words settling heavily on his shoulders. He didn't know if he could forgive her, but he knew one thing for certain. Everything had changed. The trust they had built over the years was shattered, and the road ahead was uncertain. "I don't know if I can do this," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. Claire reached out, her hand trembling as it brushed his cheek. "I understand, but please don't give up on me. Don't give up on us." Daniel took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The emotions swirling inside him were overwhelming. Confusion, betrayal, and surprisingly, a strange sense of relief. She was telling the truth. At least, he hoped she was. He stepped back from her, rubbing his face in frustration. "I need time, Claire. I need time to think. Everything's just too much right now." Claire nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I understand. Take all the time you need. But please, don't shut me out. I need you to believe me." The following days were a blur. Daniel couldn't focus on anything. His job, his routine, even his own thoughts. His mind kept returning to Claire's words, to the pain in her eyes when she confessed her past. But there was still a lingering doubt in his heart. He tried to go about his day as normal, but every time he saw Claire, every time she looked at him with that hopeful gaze, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. Could she truly have been hiding something so painful for all this time? Or was this just another lie to cover up something darker? As the days passed, Daniel found himself slowly distancing himself from Claire. He didn't want to confront her again, not yet, not when his emotions were so raw. But the more he avoided her, the more he started to feel like he was losing her. The tension in their home became unbearable. They no longer shared the quiet moments they once had. No more dinners together, no more casual conversations. Instead, there was silence, a chasm between them that neither of them seemed willing to cross. Then one evening, just as Daniel was about to leave for work, he heard a knock at the door. He opened it, and to his surprise, it was Sam, the therapist Claire had been seeing. Sam stood there looking uneasy, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Hey, Daniel," he said, his voice hesitant. "I need to talk to you." Daniel frowned. "What do you want?" "I think it's time you knew the full story," Sam said quietly. "There's something else Claire hasn't told you." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He stepped aside, motioning for Sam to come in. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. The truth. He needed to hear it, no matter how painful it would be. Sam sat down on the couch, looking uncomfortable. "Listen, I know this is going to be hard to hear, but I think it's time you knew the whole truth. Claire hasn't just been dealing with her past. She's been going through something else entirely." "What do you mean?" Daniel asked, his voice tight with suspicion. Sam hesitated, clearly struggling with how to say what he needed to. "She didn't just come to me for therapy because of her childhood. There's more. Something she's been hiding from everyone, including me. And it's something I never thought I'd have to tell you." Daniel's stomach churned. He had a sinking feeling in his gut that this was going to change everything. "Just tell me, Sam. What is it?" Sam sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "Claire's been struggling with a deep addiction. She's been using drugs for years, ever since she was a teenager, and she's been hiding it from everyone, including you." Daniel felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. Drugs, addiction. This was something he never could have imagined in a million years. Claire, his Claire, was an addict? How could she have hidden this from him? "She's been in recovery for a while now," Sam continued, his voice filled with guilt. "But it's been hard. The pressure, the secrecy, it's all been eating away at her. And she's been afraid to tell you because she didn't want to lose you." Daniel's mind was a whirlpool of emotions, rage, confusion, disbelief. He had spent so long trying to figure out the truth, but now that he had it, he didn't know what to do with it. Was this the reason for all the distance between them? The reason she had been so secretive? "Why didn't she tell me?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't she trust me enough to let me in?" Sam looked down, his expression sorrowful. "Because she didn't want to burden you, Daniel. She didn't want you to see her as weak. She's been fighting this battle on her own for so long, and she didn't know how to let anyone in. Not even you." Daniel stood there, his mind reeling from the weight of Sam's words. His world, the life he had built with Claire, seemed to be crumbling around him. He had thought the affair was the worst of it, but now he realized there was so much more going on, so much more than he could have ever imagined. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Daniel muttered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "How do I know what's real? How do I know what's true?" Sam stood up, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "I understand that this is a lot to process, but you need to talk to Claire. You need to ask her yourself. Only she can tell you the full truth." Daniel nodded, his mind still spinning. This wasn't how he had imagined this conversation going. He had expected anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. But what he was feeling now was something entirely different. His emotions were all tangled up. Love, confusion, pain, and uncertainty. That night after Sam left, Daniel found himself sitting alone in the dark. He had no idea how to move forward, how to make sense of the mess his life had become. But one thing was clear: whatever happened next, things could never go back to the way they were before. The silence in the house was deafening. The weight of the truth pressed heavily on Daniel's chest as he sat motionless, staring at the empty space in front of him. His mind kept returning to Claire's confession, her eyes filled with so much pain and regret. He wanted to believe her, to trust her, but something inside him screamed that the pieces didn't quite fit together. The next morning, Daniel found himself pacing the living room. He couldn't sit still. The hours dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. He had to talk to Claire, had to confront her again. He couldn't keep living in this state of limbo. When Claire finally came home that evening, Daniel was waiting for her. She stood in the doorway, her eyes darting around the room as if she knew something was off. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice tentative. "We need to talk," Daniel said, his voice low but firm. Claire nodded, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. She didn't say anything, just stood there, waiting for him to speak. "Sam told me everything," Daniel said, his voice steady but filled with anger. "About your addiction, about how you've been hiding it from me. You lied to me, Claire. All this time, you lied." Claire's face paled and she took a step back, her hand reaching for the wall to steady herself. "I didn't lie to you," she whispered. "You hid it," Daniel interrupted, his voice rising. "You hid everything from me. All of it. The therapy, the addiction, everything." Claire closed her eyes, her body trembling as she fought to hold back tears. "I didn't want to hurt you, Daniel. I thought if I kept it to myself, it would be easier. I didn't want you to see me like this. I didn't want you to think I was weak." Daniel's anger flared, but beneath it, there was a deep sadness. "You should have trusted me, Claire. You should have let me in. We're supposed to be partners, to be there for each other. But you kept pushing me away." I know," Claire whispered, tears spilling down her face. "And I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to let you in. I was ashamed of myself. I thought you would leave me." Daniel took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside him. "I don't know what to think anymore," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if I can forgive you for everything you've kept from me." Claire stepped forward, reaching for him. "Please, Daniel," she begged, her voice shaking. "I love you. I need you to understand. I didn't want this. I didn't want any of it." Daniel looked at her, his chest tightening with conflicting emotions. He wanted to believe her. He really did. But the betrayal felt too deep. How could he just erase all the lies, all the secrets? How could he move past it? "I don't know if I can forgive you, Claire," Daniel said quietly. "I don't know if I can trust you again." Claire's face crumpled, and she collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she whispered. "I don't deserve anything. But I can't lose you. Please, Daniel, please don't leave me." Daniel stood there, torn between his love for her and the gnawing pain in his heart. Everything about their relationship felt like a lie now, like a fragile house of cards on the verge of collapsing. As the night wore on, they sat in silence. Daniel couldn't bring himself to leave, but he also couldn't bring himself to move any closer to her. The distance between them had grown too wide, and he didn't know if they could ever bridge the gap. The following days were filled with tension. Daniel tried to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting back to Claire and the secrets she had revealed. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off, that there was more to the story than she was letting on. He began to question everything. Everything Claire had told him, everything he had believed about their life together. The more he thought about it, the more doubts crept into his mind. Could he really trust her? Could he truly believe that she had been trying to protect him all along? One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cold cup of coffee in front of him, Daniel's phone buzzed. It was a message from Claire. "I need to talk to you," the text read. "There's more you don't know. Please meet me tonight." Daniel's heart raced. What now? Had she been hiding even more from him? Was there something else that she hadn't told him yet? The uncertainty gnawed at him. He typed back a simple reply. "I'll be there." Later that night, Daniel arrived at their usual meeting spot, a small cafe they used to go to when they first started dating. Claire was already there, sitting at a corner table, her face pale and drawn. She looked up as he entered, her eyes filled with fear. "You're here," she said softly. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Daniel sat down across from her, his heart pounding. "What is it, Claire?" She looked down at her hands, wringing them nervously. "It's about the night I went to the hospital," she said, her voice shaking. Daniel's stomach twisted. What do you mean? You never told me about a hospital visit. Claire's eyes filled with tears. I wasn't just using drugs, Daniel. I wasn't just hiding it. That night, I tried to end everything. I was so broken, so lost that I thought it would be easier if I wasn't here anymore. The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. He had never imagined that things had been so bad, that Claire had been so close to the edge. His anger melted away, replaced by a deep sorrow. I never wanted you to find out like this, Claire whispered. I never wanted you to see me as someone who couldn't handle it. Daniel reached across the table, taking her hand in his. I had no idea, Claire, he said quietly. I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't know you were hurting like that. I didn't want you to see me as weak, Claire said, her voice trembling. I thought if you knew, you would leave me. Daniel shook his head, squeezing her hand. I would never leave you, Claire, but we need to work through this together. We need to be honest with each other. No more secrets. Claire nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and fear. I know you're right, she said quietly, but can we ever get back to the way we were? Can I ever make it right between us? Daniel stared at her for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. For so long, he had built his life around this relationship, around the trust they had shared. But now that trust felt fragile, as though it could shatter at any moment. Could they rebuild it? Could they ever be the same again? I don't know, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But we can't keep living in the shadows of these lies. We need to face everything, Claire. No more hiding. Claire's tears fell freely now, her face crumpling as she leaned forward, pressing her forehead against the table. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted to put you through this. Daniel closed his eyes, fighting the rising tide of emotions within him. He wanted to forgive her. He wanted to hold her and tell her everything would be okay. But the pain of betrayal ran deep, and he wasn't sure if he could erase the years of secrets, lies, and hidden truths. They sat in silence for a long time, the quiet of the cafe wrapping around them like a shroud. The only sound was the soft clink of cups and plates in the background. Time seemed to stretch and bend, as though the weight of the moment was slowing everything down. I need to think, Daniel finally said, his voice hoarse. I need to be alone for a while. Claire nodded silently, her eyes brimming with regret. She understood. There was nothing more to say, no more excuses. The damage had been done, and now all they could do was figure out how to move forward. As Daniel left the cafe, he felt as though he were walking through a fog. His thoughts were scattered, his heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. He had always believed in their love, in their connection, but now it felt like it was slipping through his fingers. He didn't know how long he walked, but when he finally found himself outside their apartment, the truth hit him again. He was still living in a house filled with lies, a house where the walls seemed to close in on him, suffocating him with the secrets that had been kept for so long. Later that night, as Daniel lay in bed, his mind wouldn't quiet. His thoughts churned restlessly, racing through the revelations Claire had shared and the overwhelming sense of betrayal that clung to him. But beneath it all, there was something else, a faint spark of hope. Maybe they could rebuild. Maybe they could find a way to heal. He had to try. For the sake of their future, for the sake of their love, he had to try. But that meant facing the truth, confronting all the lies and letting go of the pain. It wasn't going to be easy, but nothing worth having ever was. Over the next few days, Daniel and Claire tried to navigate the shifting dynamics of their relationship. There were moments of closeness, moments of tenderness, but there were also long stretches of silence, filled with unsaid words and unresolved tension. Daniel found himself watching Claire more closely than ever before, scrutinizing her every move, looking for signs of dishonesty, for cracks in her facade. He didn't trust her completely, not yet. But as he watched her struggle to make amends, a part of him couldn't help but wonder if she was truly trying to change, if she was sincere in her desire to rebuild their trust. One evening, after a particularly tense conversation, Daniel decided to take a different approach. Instead of confronting her about what he suspected, he decided to observe. He would watch her without her knowing, without any interference. He would find the truth on his own. That night, as Claire left to run some errands, Daniel did the unthinkable. He installed cameras in their home. He didn't want to do it. He didn't want to be that person, the person who violated her privacy. But the fear of being deceived again, the fear of losing everything, was too great. As the cameras blinked to life, Daniel felt a pang of guilt. This was a violation. He knew it. But at the same time, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the only way to uncover the truth. The first night, he sat in front of his laptop, watching the live feed from the cameras. Claire entered the house, oblivious to the fact that she was being watched. She moved about the apartment, going about her usual routine. But as Daniel watched her, a sense of unease washed over him. Was this the woman he thought he knew, or was she hiding something more? The next few nights were filled with tension. Daniel continued to monitor the cameras, watching for any signs of dishonesty, any sign that Claire was hiding something from him. But all he saw was her daily routine, until one night. It was late, and Daniel was exhausted, his eyelids heavy with sleep. But he couldn't stop watching. He couldn't look away. And then, just as he was about to shut the laptop, he saw it. A man entered the apartment. Daniel's heart stopped. He froze, his eyes glued to the screen as the man and Claire exchanged a brief, intimate conversation. Daniel couldn't hear their words, but the way they looked at each other, the way their bodies moved, told him everything he needed to know. The betrayal was real. He wanted to scream, to rush into the apartment and confront her right then and there. But instead, he sat there, numb, staring at the screen. The truth had shattered him. The woman he loved, the woman he had given everything to, had betrayed him in the worst possible way. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He couldn't. He just sat there, watching the footage over and over again, unable to erase the image of Claire with another man from his mind. The following day, Daniel couldn't bring himself to confront Claire immediately. The weight of the betrayal felt suffocating. The images of the man in their apartment were seared into his mind, and each time he closed his eyes, he saw their faces, their closeness, their intimacy. It was as though everything he had built with Claire was nothing but a facade. He could feel the coldness spreading through him, a numbness that dulled his emotions. Part of him wanted to scream, to demand answers, but another part of him feared that hearing the truth would destroy him completely. Was this the end? Had their love, their years together, all been a lie? As the hours stretched on, Daniel tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting back to the cameras, the footage, Claire, the man. The reality of the situation felt like a punch to the gut every time he thought about it. He couldn't escape it. That evening, when Claire returned home, Daniel could barely look at her. She sensed the change in his demeanor immediately. The tension between them was palpable, thick and suffocating. She knew something was wrong, but would she be brave enough to face the consequences of her actions? "Dan, what's going on?" Claire asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You've been distant all day. What's wrong?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He stood in the living room staring out the window, his fists clenched at his sides. How could he even begin to explain what he had seen, what he had uncovered? The truth felt too brutal, too devastating to share. "I know," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I know about him, Claire." Claire froze, her face draining of color. She took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. She had never thought he would find out, never imagined that he would see the truth. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel turned to face her, his eyes dark with pain. "I saw the footage. The man you've been seeing. I saw everything." The room seemed to tilt as Claire's world collapsed around her. She stumbled back, her mind reeling. The man, Daniel knew. How? How had he found out? The cameras, the surveillance. For a long moment, there was silence. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The truth hung in the air between them like a poison, slowly suffocating them both. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice broken and raw. "I'm so sorry, Dan. I never meant for you to find out like this. I never wanted to hurt you." Daniel's hands balled into fists. "Then why? Why did you do it? Why betray me?" Claire's face crumpled with emotion, and for the first time, Daniel saw the raw pain in her eyes. "I don't have an excuse. There's no reason that justifies it. I made a mistake. I hurt you in the worst possible way, and I can't take it back." The words hung in the air, but they offered no comfort. Nothing could undo the damage that had been done. Nothing could erase the images that haunted Daniel's mind. "I don't know what to say," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can trust you again." Claire's eyes filled with tears as she took a step toward him, reaching out as if she could somehow bridge the gap between them. "I love you, Dan. I've always loved you. I made a terrible mistake, but I want to fix it. I want to prove to you that I can be the woman you deserve." But Daniel pulled away, stepping back. "Number, you don't get to just fix this. You've shattered everything." For a long time, the room remained silent, the air thick with their unresolved emotions. The love they had once shared now felt distant, like a dream slipping through his fingers. "I don't know what to do," Claire whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't change the past, but I'm willing to do anything to make it right." Daniel's gaze hardened. "You can't fix this. You've already crossed a line that can't be undone." The truth was out. The man had entered their lives, and now it was too late to go back. The foundation of their relationship had been shattered, and there was no way to rebuild it, not without first facing the consequences of their actions. That night, Daniel lay in bed alone, the darkness pressing in on him. His mind raced with thoughts of the future. His future. What would it look like now? Could he move on from this? Could he ever trust again? His phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Claire. "I'll do anything to make this right. Please don't give up on us." Daniel stared at the screen, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. Could he forgive her? Could he give her another chance? He didn't know. All he knew was that the pain was too fresh, the betrayal too raw. In the days that followed, Daniel remained distant. He couldn't bring himself to forgive Claire, couldn't bring himself to even speak to her. The wounds were still too deep, the scars too fresh. But something began to shift. As time passed, Daniel realized that the anger and hurt were consuming him, that they were holding him captive in a prison of his own making. He couldn't keep living in the shadow of his own pain. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to heal. Maybe he could find a way to forgive her, to rebuild their relationship. But first, he would have to let go of the past. The path to forgiveness would be long, and it would be hard. But Daniel knew that if there was any chance of moving forward, he would have to face the truth and embrace the possibility of a future where trust, once broken, could be rebuilt. And as he sat alone in his apartment, contemplating the road ahead, he felt a strange sense of hope flicker within him. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick. But perhaps, with time, he and Claire could find a way to heal the wounds that had been inflicted. And maybe, just maybe, they could start over. The following week, Claire tried everything she could to regain Daniel's trust. She gave him space, respected his silence, but nothing seemed to bring them closer. Each time she looked into his eyes, she saw the pain, the doubt, and the uncertainty. She wanted to scream, to explain herself, but she knew the damage had been done. Words couldn't undo the betrayal. Daniel, on the other hand, had begun to wrestle with his own demons. He wasn't sure whether he wanted to forgive her or whether he was simply afraid of being alone. The thought of moving forward without Claire was unbearable. Yet every time he thought about the man in their house, his stomach churned with rage. Could he truly look past her betrayal? His internal struggle was eating him alive. One minute he wanted to give up on everything. The next, he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. He knew he had to make a decision, but the choice wasn't as clear-cut as he had hoped. Days passed and the air between them remained tense, each moment an uncomfortable reminder of the fracture in their relationship. They sat in silence at the dinner table, ate meals without speaking, and slept in separate rooms. The space between them was growing wider with each passing day. But then, one evening, as Daniel was scrolling through his phone, he came across something unexpected. A message, not from Claire, but from the man in the footage. His heart skipped a beat as he read the message. It was an apology for what had happened, for the betrayal, for hurting both him and Claire. The man confessed that he had been a fool, that he had allowed his emotions to cloud his judgment. He didn't want to hurt anyone. Daniel's hand trembled as he stared at the screen. Why was this man apologizing? Why was he reaching out? Was it guilt, or was it something else? He couldn't make sense of it, but the fact that the man had contacted him meant one thing. He hadn't disappeared from their lives. The truth, the whole truth, was still out there. Daniel couldn't ignore it. Without telling Claire, Daniel decided to confront the man. He couldn't let the unknown linger any longer. His need for closure, for understanding, had consumed him. The confrontation was set for the next day. Daniel's nerves were on edge, but he steeled himself for whatever awaited him. He needed to know what had driven the man to betray him, to betray them both. The following morning, Daniel drove to the address the man had given him in his message. As he arrived, his heart raced. The place was secluded, a small house on the outskirts of town, hidden behind overgrown trees and a long dirt road. He knocked on the door, his breath shallow, his thoughts a whirlwind of questions. When the door opened, the man stood before him, looking as if he hadn't slept in days. His face was drawn with guilt, his eyes haunted. "Daniel," the man said softly, "I didn't want you to find out this way. I never meant for it to go this far." "Then why did it?" Daniel demanded, his voice cold, though a part of him was struggling to understand. "Why did you do it?" The man hesitated before speaking again. "I was selfish. I was blinded by my own desires. I didn't think about the consequences. I just acted on impulse. And now everything's broken." Daniel's anger flared, but beneath it, he felt something else, something deeper, something more complex. He was angry, yes, but there was also sorrow. Sorrow for Claire, for their relationship, for everything that had been lost. "You don't get to just apologize and make it better," Daniel spat, his fist clenched at his sides. "You don't get to break us apart and expect it all to be okay again." The man lowered his gaze, clearly ashamed. I know there's no fixing this. I wanted to make it right somehow. I can't undo what I've done, but I can at least tell you the truth." Daniel looked at the man, weighing his words. The truth was important, but it wasn't going to bring back what had been lost. It wasn't going to heal the wounds. "What exactly is the truth?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. "The truth is, I didn't mean to fall for her. It wasn't like that at first," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But one thing led to another, and we got involved. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to be the cause of your pain. Daniel cut him off, his voice trembling with emotion. "You don't get to explain it. You don't get to justify it. What you did was unforgivable." The man nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I know. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I didn't want to be the reason you lost everything." Daniel's gaze hardened. "Then leave. Get out of my life, and get out of Claire's life." The man nodded wordlessly, turning to walk away. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching him go, his heart still heavy with the weight of the situation. It wasn't over. The truth had been revealed, but it had only added more questions. As Daniel returned home, he felt a sense of finality. The man was gone, but the damage was done. There was no going back. There was no fixing what had been broken. Claire was waiting for him when he arrived, her face full of apprehension. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It doesn't matter. It's over." Claire's face fell, the hope in her eyes extinguishing. "Dan, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you." Daniel didn't respond. He walked past her, heading to the living room. His heart was heavy, but his mind was made up. There was nothing left for him in this relationship, nothing left to salvage. The silence that followed felt deafening. Both of them knew that the love they once shared was no longer there, that the trust had been shattered beyond repair. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The weight of the conversation with the man, the truth that had been laid bare, pressed heavily on his chest. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of Claire and the man together flashed before him. The betrayal was raw, a wound that refused to heal. The next morning, Claire tried once more to talk, but Daniel wasn't ready. He couldn't speak about what was left unsaid. Not yet. Not when the pain was still so fresh. "Dan, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "I don't want to lose you." But Daniel didn't respond. He had made up his mind. He knew he couldn't live with the constant reminder of what had happened. The uncertainty, the doubt. It was suffocating. Claire, sensing the finality in his silence, broke down. Her tears were genuine, but Daniel couldn't tell if they were for him or for herself. "I never meant for it to go this far," Claire said, her voice barely audible. "It was a mistake. I was weak. I never wanted to hurt you. Please understand." Daniel turned away. He couldn't hear it anymore. The words didn't matter. They couldn't undo the damage. As the days passed, the tension grew even thicker. Neither of them could ignore the elephant in the room. They shared the same space, but it felt like they were in two different worlds. The connection between them was shattered, and every attempt to fix it felt like a futile exercise. Daniel's heart had already made its decision. He couldn't live like this. But there was something else gnawing at him, something he couldn't shake. The man's apology haunted him, as did his last words. Could it be that he, too, had been a victim of circumstances? But no. He couldn't entertain such thoughts. It wasn't about the man. It was about Claire, and she had betrayed him. But still, the question lingered. Could they ever go back to the way things were? Was there any way to fix what had been broken? The night came, and Claire sat in the living room, staring out the window, lost in thought. Daniel stood by the door, his hand on the knob, ready to leave. He glanced at her one last time. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I need to be alone." Claire didn't say anything. She didn't try to stop him. She simply nodded, as if she knew the end had come. Daniel left, stepping into the cold night air, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow. He had made the decision, but the weight of it was heavy. Could he truly walk away from everything? As he walked through the streets, his mind raced with thoughts of what could have been, of the life they could have had if only things had turned out differently. But he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't live in a world where trust didn't exist. The next morning, Daniel packed his things, slowly, methodically. He wasn't sure where he would go, but he couldn't stay in that house any longer. The memories were too painful, the reminders too much to bear. As he loaded the last of his belongings into the car, Claire appeared at the door. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying. "You're leaving?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel looked at her, his heart heavy with sorrow. "I have to. I can't stay here. Not after everything that's happened." Claire stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Please, don't go. I know I've hurt you, but I love you. I never wanted to lose you." Daniel shook his head. "It's too late for that." The finality in his voice hit Claire like a slap in the face. She had lost him. For good. Without another word, Daniel got into the car and drove away. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least it was his own. Claire stood there watching him disappear into the distance, her heart breaking. She had lost the love of her life, and nothing could change that. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel began to rebuild his life. He focused on himself, on finding peace in the absence of the chaos Claire had brought into his world. But even as he moved forward, a part of him couldn't forget the love they had shared. The pain of the betrayal still lingered, but over time, it became more bearable. He started dating again, meeting new people, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. And then one day, he received a call from an unknown number. His heart skipped a beat as he answered. "Daniel," the voice on the other end said, "It's me. I need to talk to you." His pulse quickened as he recognized the voice. It was Claire. "I've been thinking," she continued, "and I know I can't undo what I've done, but I need to know, can we ever fix this? Can we ever find a way back to each other?" Daniel felt a wave of emotion wash over him, a mixture of anger, sorrow, and longing. He had moved on, or so he thought. "Claire," he said, his voice trembling, I don't know if we can. But what I do know is that we both need to heal. And maybe that starts with letting go. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Claire spoke again. I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry for everything. Goodbye, Claire, Daniel said softly, before hanging up the phone. As he sat there, the weight of the past finally started to lift. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He was finally free. The weeks that followed were filled with a strange sense of peace. Daniel kept busy with work, his hobbies, and building new connections. But every now and then, his mind would drift back to Claire, to the love they once shared, and the dark hole that had formed where trust used to be. He tried to distract himself, but the memories of their time together haunted him like shadows in the corners of his mind. He could still remember their first date, the spark between them, the way she smiled when he cracked a joke. Those were the moments that felt real. The moments that made him believe in forever. But forever wasn't meant to be. That much was clear now. One evening, after a long day at work, Daniel found himself at a bar with a friend, sharing a drink and unwinding. The conversation flowed easily, but a part of him couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. The familiar faces around him seemed to fade into the background, as if he was floating in a world that no longer made sense. "You okay, man?" his friend asked, sensing the shift in his mood. Daniel nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just thinking about some stuff." "I get it," his friend said. "It's hard, you know, after everything you've been through. But don't forget, life goes on, and you've got a lot of good things ahead of you." Daniel took a deep breath, trying to absorb the words. He appreciated the support, but there was something inside him that wasn't ready to move on. The hurt was still there, simmering beneath the surface. "I know," Daniel replied, "but sometimes it feels like I'm just pretending to be okay." The conversation shifted, but the weight of his feelings lingered. That night, Daniel went home and sat in the quiet of his apartment, the silence amplifying the emptiness that consumed him. It was in these quiet moments that his mind started to wander back to Claire. He wondered if she had changed, if she was truly sorry for what she had done. But deep down, he knew that nothing would ever be the same. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Daniel stood up, confused. He wasn't expecting anyone. As he opened the door, he was greeted by a familiar face. Claire. His heart skipped a beat, a mixture of surprise, anger, and confusion rushing through him. He hadn't seen her in weeks. What was she doing here? "Daniel," she said softly, her eyes pleading, "can we talk?" He hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He had spent so much time moving on, trying to rebuild his life, and now here she was, disrupting everything once again. "I don't know if there's anything left to say," Daniel replied, his voice cold but not without pain. "Please," Claire whispered, stepping closer. "I just need you to understand. I made a terrible mistake, but I've learned from it. I've changed. I've been going to therapy. I want to be better. For you. For us." Daniel's heart ached as he looked at her. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, but he wasn't sure if he could ever trust her again. "I don't know if I can believe you," he said quietly, stepping back. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you did." Claire reached out, her hand trembling. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I am so sorry for everything. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but please, let me show you that I'm willing to do the work. I want to earn back your trust." Daniel stood there, torn between the pain of the past and the possibility of a future with her. He had moved on, but a small part of him still wanted to believe that they could rebuild what was broken. "I don't know if we can go back to the way things were," Daniel finally said, "but I'm willing to listen. We can talk, but I need to know that you're truly committed to changing." Claire nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I am, I swear. I will do whatever it takes." They sat down together, and for the first time in weeks, they talked openly and honestly. The conversation was raw, emotional, and filled with pain. But there was something else there. Something that had been missing for a long time. Hope. As the evening drew to a close, Daniel felt a flicker of something within him. Maybe it was too soon to say for sure, but for the first time in a long while, he believed that healing was possible. The road ahead was uncertain, and the scars of the past would always remain. But Daniel knew that he couldn't continue living in the shadow of his past mistakes. Whether or not he could forgive Claire, he realized that forgiveness was as much for him as it was for her. "Let's take it one day at a time," he said, his voice steady. "We can figure this out together." Claire smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for giving us a chance." The night ended with the promise of something new. The future was still a mystery, but for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt that he was on the right path. Over the following weeks, Daniel and Claire took cautious steps toward rebuilding their relationship. They met regularly, talked openly, and worked through the pain and mistrust that had once separated them. Therapy was helping, though the road to healing was long and filled with emotional bumps. The first few sessions were difficult. Both Daniel and Claire had to face uncomfortable truths about themselves, about each other, and about what had led to the breakdown of their relationship. But with every session, Daniel began to feel a slight shift. Claire wasn't the same woman who had betrayed him. There was a sense of remorse, a genuine desire to make amends. It wasn't easy for Daniel, but slowly he allowed himself to soften. Still, doubts lingered. Every time they were together, he couldn't help but feel the shadow of the past hanging over them. The camera footage, the lies, the secret meetings. How could he ever forget? How could he let go of the images that replayed in his mind? One evening, as they sat on the couch, Claire turned to him with a tentative expression. "Daniel, I need to ask you something." He looked at her, his brow furrowed. "What is it? Are we really moving forward, or are we just pretending? Are we just afraid to let go because we're too comfortable with the pain?" The question hit him harder than he expected. Was she right? Was he just holding on to the past because it was familiar? The thought made him uneasy, but deep down, he knew he wasn't ready to give up just yet. "I'm trying," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm trying to trust you again. I'm trying to believe in us." Claire smiled faintly, her eyes searching his face. "I know it's hard, but we can't keep living in the past. We have to make a decision. Either we move forward or we let go." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with his emotions. He didn't want to let go of Claire. Not yet, but was he clinging to something that wasn't there anymore? The answer wasn't clear, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't live in limbo. Either they found a way to move past the hurt, or it was over. In the following days, Daniel found himself becoming more distant. He kept thinking about the night Claire had walked out, the moment she had broken his heart. But as much as he wanted to stay angry, to punish her for the betrayal, he couldn't bring himself to do it. The pain still stung, but it wasn't as sharp as before. Slowly, he began to accept the reality that life, for better or worse, was moving forward. Then one evening, as Daniel was scrolling through his phone, he received an unexpected message. It was from an unknown number. Curious, he opened it, only to find a photo attached. His heart stopped as he saw the image, a picture of Claire, smiling with a man he didn't recognize. The caption read, "You can't escape the truth." Daniel's stomach turned as he stared at the photo. The man was standing too close to Claire, their faces too intimate. It was a picture he had never seen before. Had it been taken recently? Was Claire still seeing this man? Panic gripped Daniel. Was she lying to him again? Had everything they had worked for been for nothing? His hands trembled as he texted back, "Who is this? What is this?" A few minutes passed before the reply came through. "I thought you'd want to know the truth." The message left Daniel reeling. Who was this person? And why were they sending him this photo? Was it someone from Claire's past? Or was it someone else entirely? Unable to shake the unsettling feeling, Daniel decided to confront Claire. He called her and asked her to meet him. He needed answers. The past few weeks had been difficult enough, and now this new twist threatened to unravel everything. They met at the same coffee shop where they had first begun their journey of reconciliation. As soon as Claire walked in, Daniel's heart sank. There was a look of guilt in her eyes, a nervousness he hadn't seen before. "We need to talk," Daniel said, his voice tight. He didn't waste any time. He pulled out his phone and showed her the picture. Claire gasped, her face paling as she saw the image. "Daniel, I can explain," she started. but her voice faltered. "Who is he, Claire?" Daniel's voice was low, barely controlled. "What's going on? Why are you still seeing him?" Claire looked down, her hands trembling as she took the phone from him. I don't know who sent that to you. I swear I haven't been seeing anyone else. I haven't been with him in months." "Then why was this sent to me?" Daniel's frustration boiled over. "What's going on, Claire? Why do I keep getting pulled into this web of lies?" Claire took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "That man, he was a part of my past. Someone I tried to forget. He was from before everything fell apart, before you and I even met. I haven't seen him in so long, but I promise Daniel I have nothing to do with him now. I'm not hiding anything." The words stung. It felt like a slap to the face. He wanted to believe her, but everything inside him screamed that this was another lie. The betrayal was too much. The doubts were too strong. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I can trust you anymore." Claire's eyes filled with tears as she reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "I love you, Daniel, and I'm sorry for everything. I don't want to lose you. Please just give me one more chance." For a long moment, Daniel sat there staring into her eyes. His heart was torn between the love they had shared and the truth that was so hard to face. Could he keep going? Could he trust her again? Slowly, he pulled his hand away. "I need time," he said, standing up. "I don't know what I need right now, but I can't make this decision tonight." Without another word, Daniel walked out of the coffee shop, the weight of the decision heavy on his chest. He didn't know where the road would take him, but one thing was clear. He couldn't keep living in a world where trust was constantly in question. For the next few days, Daniel kept to himself. He didn't reach out to Claire, and he avoided seeing her. Every conversation, every moment they had shared seemed to unravel in his mind, playing like a loop he couldn't escape. He went through the motions of his day, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. His work felt like a distraction, a way to pass the time and keep his thoughts occupied. But even then, the images kept coming back. The picture of Claire with the other man, the feeling of betrayal, the feeling of being in a constant state of limbo. On the third day, Daniel's phone rang. He didn't have to look at the screen to know who it was. It was Claire. He let it ring out, not ready to face her. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to say, or if he even had the strength to hear her out. His phone buzzed with a new message. "Daniel, I understand if you need space, but I can't lose you. I need you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that I'm committed to us. Please just talk to me." Daniel stared at the message, his thoughts swirling. He felt the weight of the past few months pressing down on him. How had they gone from being in love, planning a future together, to this fractured, uncertain relationship? How had it all gone wrong? That evening, he decided to meet her. He couldn't keep running away from the truth. He needed to confront whatever feelings he had left, for better or for worse. They met again at the same coffee shop, but this time, there was no lightness in the air. The tension between them was palpable. Daniel could see it in Claire's eyes. She was nervous, desperate even. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Daniel started, his voice quiet. "I know you want to fix things, but the question is, can we fix this? Can I ever trust you again?" Claire's face softened. She reached out, her hand trembling as she took his. "Daniel, I swear I've been trying so hard to make it right. I'm not perfect, and I've made mistakes, but I can't lose you. I love you, and I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the turning point. Maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what they had. But doubt lingered, gnawing at him, a constant reminder of the cracks that had already formed in their foundation. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," Daniel admitted. "I don't know if I can keep putting myself through this. Every time I think we're moving forward, something happens. I can't keep living with this fear. It's breaking me." Claire looked crushed, her eyes brimming with tears. "Daniel, I know I've hurt you, and I'm so sorry, but I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm asking you to trust me again. I know it's going to take time, but I want to prove that I can be the person you deserve." He looked at her, torn between the pain of the past and the possibility of the future. "I want to believe you, Claire, but it's so hard. You've given me too many reasons to doubt you." Claire's voice broke as she whispered, "Please, Daniel. Please don't let this be the end of us." His heart ached, but he knew he couldn't keep going like this. Something had to change. Something had to give. "I can't keep doing this, Claire," Daniel said, standing up from the table. "I need to figure out what I really want. I need time. I can't keep being in this emotional chaos." He walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Claire behind, the sound of her sobs echoing in his ears. He had made a decision, but it wasn't the one he wanted. The weight of the decision felt like a burden he couldn't escape. Daniel spent the next few weeks reflecting on everything. He thought about Claire, about their past, and about what he wanted for his future. He couldn't deny the connection they had once shared, but the fear of being hurt again was overwhelming. One night, as he sat alone in his apartment, Daniel's phone buzzed again. It was a message from Claire. He hesitated for a moment, his thumb hovering over the screen before he opened it. "I've made the hardest decision of my life," Claire's message read. "I'm letting you go, Daniel. I can't keep holding on to something that's breaking us both. You deserve to be happy, and I need to let you find that happiness, even if it's without me." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. His heart sank. Was this what he wanted? Was he really ready to let go of the woman he had once loved? He sat there in silence, reading the message over and over again. This was the final blow. The end of something that had once seemed so promising. The end of their relationship. But in that moment, Daniel realized something. It wasn't about holding on to the past or trying to fix something that was broken. It was about finding peace, about moving forward, and about learning to trust himself again. As the days passed, Daniel began to heal. The anger, the hurt, the confusion, they all began to fade, replaced by a sense of clarity. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally in control of his own life. The road ahead was uncertain, but Daniel knew that he had the strength to face whatever came his way. He had learned the hard way that sometimes letting go was the only way to move forward. And with that realization, Daniel took his first step into a new chapter of his life, free from the chains of the past, ready to embrace whatever the future had in store. It was a few weeks later when Daniel found himself walking past the familiar places he and Claire had once enjoyed together. The parks, the coffee shops, the little corner bookstore, they all seemed to hold memories of a different time, a time when everything felt right. But now everything felt different. There was no more excitement when he passed those places. Instead, there was an overwhelming sense of loss. It was as if a part of him had been buried with their relationship. He kept moving forward, though. He didn't let himself linger in the past for too long. The only thing that mattered now was finding peace within himself. For the first time, he realized how much he had neglected his own happiness in the pursuit of love. One evening, while Daniel was reading a book at home, his phone rang again. It was Claire. He stared at the screen for a long moment, unsure whether he was ready to face her. Part of him still wanted answers. Part of him still wondered if there was a chance to fix what had been broken. But another part of him knew that it was time to let go. He needed to close that chapter of his life for good. He needed to move forward, no matter how hard it was. Daniel ignored the call and turned his phone off. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was taking control. The silence around him was no longer filled with questions or doubts. It was filled with clarity. He began to focus more on his own life. He reconnected with old friends, picked up new hobbies, and started to rebuild the parts of himself he had lost in the relationship. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the pain of the past crept in, but he knew that he was healing. One day he received a message from Claire. It was short, but it was enough to make his heart race. "I saw you at the bookstore today. You looked good. I hope you're doing okay." Daniel stared at the message. His emotions conflicted. He wanted to respond, to tell her everything he had been feeling, but instead he took a deep breath and put his phone down. He had come too far to go back now. For the first time in months, Daniel felt like he was in control of his own life. He had learned the hard way that sometimes the best thing you can do is let go. And as the days passed, he found peace in the decisions he had made. It wasn't the ending he had wanted, but it was the ending he needed. And with that, Daniel was finally ready to embrace the future, whatever it held. As the months passed, Daniel's life began to stabilize. He moved forward, focusing on his career, rediscovering his passions and reconnecting with friends, but there was still a part of him that wondered about Claire. What had truly happened between them? Was there a deeper truth that had never been uncovered? One night, as Daniel was walking home after meeting some friends for dinner, he passed the familiar apartment complex where Claire had once lived. His heart skipped a beat. He didn't know why, but something urged him to stop, to look up at her window, even though he knew it would only bring back memories. It was then that he noticed something. There was light in her apartment. He hadn't seen that in a long time. He hadn't seen Claire in months. Curiosity gnawed at him. He didn't want to go back, but his feet seemed to move on their own. Before he even realized what he was doing, Daniel was standing outside her apartment door. His heart pounded in his chest as he raised his hand to knock. He hesitated, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. Suddenly, the door swung open. There, standing before him, was Claire. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with surprise. But there was something else, something in her gaze that made his heart ache. "Daniel." Claire's voice was barely a whisper, but it was enough to make him feel as if time had stopped. "I didn't know if you would ever come back," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "Please, just talk to me. I owe you that much." Daniel stepped into the apartment, and the familiar scent of her perfume filled the air. It was as if nothing had changed, but everything had. He had changed, and so had she. They sat in silence for a moment, neither of them knowing how to begin. Finally, Claire spoke. "I know I've hurt you, Daniel, and I know I've broken your trust, but I've been living in the shadow of my own mistakes, trying to fix everything that I've ruined. I've realized that I can't fix things on my own. I need to apologize, to you and to myself." Daniel felt a rush of emotions, anger, sadness, regret, all swirling together. He wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had hurt him, how much he had sacrificed for their relationship. But at the same time, he wanted to reach out and hold her, to let her know that he still cared. "Why did you do it, Claire?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Why did you betray me?" Claire looked down at her hands, unable to meet his gaze. "I never meant for things to go this far," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I was lost, Daniel. I didn't know how to handle everything. And in my confusion, I made choices that I regret every day. I hurt you and I hurt myself." Daniel's chest tightened. He had been waiting for this moment, for the truth to come out. But now that it was here, he didn't know how to process it. The pain of betrayal was still fresh, still sharp. "I wanted to believe in us, Claire," Daniel said, his voice barely a whisper. "I wanted to believe that we could make it through anything, but I can't keep holding on to something that's already broken." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I understand, Daniel. I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I'm asking you to understand that I'm sorry, and I'm asking you to let me go, if that's what you need." The room fell silent once again, the weight of their words hanging heavy in the air. Daniel stared at Claire, trying to make sense of everything that had happened between them. His mind raced, his heart aching with the realization that it was over. But even in the face of the truth, there was something inside him, something that made him want to reach out and hold on. He wasn't sure if it was love or simply the fear of losing everything, but one thing was certain. This was the moment that would change everything. Claire stepped closer to him, her hand trembling as she reached for his. "Please, Daniel," she said softly. "I love you, and I know I've ruined that love, but I want to make things right. Please don't shut me out." For a long moment, Daniel didn't know what to say. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to give her a second chance. But the doubt lingered in his mind, the scars of betrayal too deep to ignore. Finally, with a heavy heart, he spoke the words he never thought he would say. "I need time, Claire. I need to figure out if I can ever trust you again." The days that followed were a blur. Daniel retreated into his thoughts, trying to process everything that had happened. Claire's apology echoed in his mind, but so did the betrayal. He couldn't ignore the fact that their relationship had been built on trust, and that trust had been shattered. Could he rebuild it, or was it too late? He spent nights pacing the apartment, wondering if forgiveness was something he could truly offer. Each time he thought about it, a sense of anger and hurt washed over him, making it seem impossible to move forward. He could feel his heart battling against his mind, torn between love and logic. Claire, on the other hand, was persistent. She sent messages, called, and even visited him a few times, each time hoping that he would change his mind. But each visit only left Daniel more conflicted. Her presence stirred up emotions he wasn't ready to face. One afternoon, as Daniel sat by the window, lost in thought, his phone buzzed. It was another message from Claire. "I understand if you need more time. Just know that I'm here, whenever you're ready." He stared at the message, feeling the weight of the decision bearing down on him. The uncertainty of it all was suffocating. What was the right choice? What was the choice that would allow him to move on, to truly heal? As the days turned into weeks, Daniel began to understand something crucial. It wasn't about whether he could forgive Claire. It was about whether he could forgive himself. The pain of betrayal was something that would always linger, but he needed to find a way to release it, to move forward without being shackled by the past. Finally, one evening, as he sat on the couch, staring at the photos of his former life with Claire, Daniel made his decision. He picked up the phone and dialed her number. His hands shook as he pressed the call button. It felt like a moment of finality, like he was stepping into the unknown. "Hello?" Claire answered, her voice trembling as if she had been waiting for this call. "Claire," Daniel began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've spent a lot of time thinking, and I've realized that I can't keep living in the past. I can't keep holding on to what we had because it's gone. But that doesn't mean I can't find peace." Wekur, there was a pause on the other end of the line, and Daniel could hear Claire's breath catch. "What are you saying, Daniel?" "I'm saying that I've forgiven you," Daniel said, his voice breaking slightly. "Not because I think everything can go back to how it was, but because I need to let go. I need to move on, for both of us." Claire was silent for a long moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Then finally she spoke. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "I don't deserve it, but thank you." As Daniel hung up the phone, a sense of relief washed over him. It wasn't the closure he had expected, but it was the closure he needed. He had let go of the past, and in doing so, he had freed himself. The next morning, Daniel woke up to a new sense of clarity. He was no longer weighed down by the guilt, the anger, or the heartbreak. He had forgiven, not just Claire, but himself as well. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe. As the months passed, Daniel's life began to take shape again. He focused on his career, spent time with friends, and started to rediscover his own happiness. He realized that while the past could never be erased, it no longer had control over him. And as for Claire, he never saw her again. They both moved on, each finding their own path. Sometimes he would think back to the time they had shared, but it was no longer with regret or anger. It was with a sense of understanding and acceptance. In the end, Daniel realized that sometimes the most important relationship is the one you have with yourself. Healing isn't about fixing the past. It's about learning from it, growing from it, and finding the strength to move forward. And as the years went by, Daniel found peace in that truth. He wasn't defined by his past or by the mistakes of others. He was defined by the choices he made each day, the person he was becoming, and the future he was creating for himself. The truth was, he was stronger than he had ever known, and that was the most powerful lesson of all.